Thank you. So today, Bruce actually set my presentation up quite well. He talked about the benthic part of the historical ramp program, now under JOSM, and so I'll continue on and talk a little bit about the fish work. So I'll talk first about the purpose of the fish monitoring program and the contribution to the JOSM, the study questions that the tributary portion of the fish program is trying to answer, the fish study design for the tributaries, and then I'll just go through some monitoring results focusing on one case study, the Steep Bank River, and some future considerations. So just to give you a little background, and Bruce has already touched on this a little bit, RAMP was initiated in 1997 and fully incorporated into JOSM beginning in 2014. The fish monitoring component of RAMP and now JOSM originally focused primarily on the main stem, doing fish inventory surveys on the Athabasca and Clearwater rivers, as well as fish tissue work and sentinel species work. We also did some fish fence operations on the Muskeg River and sentinel species monitoring on the select tributaries. The difficulty of the sentinel species monitoring is that it's a very costly program to implement. It's a lethal sampling program, and it's difficult to do at such a large scale as the study area of the oil sands operation. So it was recognized back in 2009 that there would be some benefit in harmonizing some of the other components that were monitored with the ramp design, or with the fish design. So the other parts that ramp monitored were hydrology, which Steve Gunther talked about, as well as benthos, water, and sediment quality. And so we wanted to harmonize the fish work with those other monitoring components and sort of improve the robustness of the program. So in 2009, we implemented fish community monitoring on all of the tributaries where water and benthos and hydrology are monitored, as well as sentinel species monitoring. In 2010, I started working with Mark McMaster at Environment Canada, who was in charge of expanding the sentinel species work in the oil sands area. So since 2010, we've co-located quite a few fish community monitoring locations with the sentinel species work. And for those that aren't familiar, sentinel species monitoring is focused on one species that has a very small range of mobility. So it's used to pick up localized effects in streams. So the purpose of the fish monitoring under the JOSM, and this is specifically focused to the tributaries, I'm not going to discuss the main stem work or the fish tissue work related to human consumption, is to define the biological integrity of fish communities in the study area, determine the current status of fish health related to sentinel species and function in the lower Athabasca region, define the baseline against which future change can be assessed, and determine the differences between reference and potentially impacted sites, reference being outside of oil sands development, and potentially impacted sites, or what RAMP has referred to as test sites, being downstream of oil sands development. And the questions that we've tried to answer are, what are the cumulative effects of oil sands development on fish and fish habitat? What is the historical and current state of fish population health in tributaries of the lower Athabasca River downstream of development specifically? And what are the watershed-specific concerns that could result in potential cumulative changes? So the way RAMP was developed was that we would look both at watershed-specific concerns, recognizing the oil sands operators were developing in different watersheds, but as well as how that contributes to the cumulative changes in the region. So just to give you a bit of how the study design for fish was developed, we wanted to look at changes in fish populations and connect it to potential stressors or impact pathways, specifically chemical, biological, or physical. So what we did was we wanted to design the program to provide a holistic and comprehensive approach that integrates all the components that we have been monitoring over time, and that goes from land change or clearing to hydrology, water quality, benthos, looking at specific sentinel species, and then at the fish community level. And we've been working to identify certain indicators at a fish community level that will identify environmental stress. So just to give you a bit of a schematic, and by no means is this encompassing everything, but at the top you have the sentinel species, which is a bit of a health indicator where we look at certain endpoints to measure if the health of a sentinel species. If we're seeing a change in a sentinel species, then you could look also at the fish community level to see if we're seeing any changes there in terms of abundance, the richness of the community, and how sensitive or tolerant the community is. And then if you're seeing changes there, we can look back at stressors such as contaminants in the water or sediment. We can also look at land clearing or land change that would physically alter the habitat or take away habitat. And then we could also look at how this might be affecting the hydrology of the rivers, changes in flows and water levels that might impact fish habitat. And then we also look at the benthic invertebrates, which Bruce discussed earlier, looking at whether the food base for fish is being impacted. So the fish community sampling, I'll just run through the design. We followed some design or some protocols that US EPA has established down in the States. We use either backpack or boat electrofishing. We select a reach that's based on the wetted width, and we divide the reach between 5 equal sub-reaches, both equal in terms of length and the amount of fishing effort. We divide into sub-reaches so that we can look at the variability in the fish community based on habitat. We measure 2 habitat transects where we look at cover, flow, substrate, things that would affect fish communities. We do the sampling in the fall where normally it's typically what we catch is juvenile large-bodied fish or small-bodied fish that are residents of those tributaries. They're not the migratory species that move in and out potentially in the spring and the late fall, or sorry, in the summer. And what we do, and similar to what Bruce has done, we've developed similar data analysis protocols where we look at trends over time, we look at upstream versus downstream, and we started to develop a regional baseline data set. So the sentinel species work, this is EEM federal protocols that I've been working with Mark McMaster and the Environment Canada crew on. They go into the same sites and we backpack electrofish or sometimes beach seine for target sentinel species. In most of the tributaries we're using slimy sculpin. It's a lethal program where we collect 20 adult male and 20 female. They also collect 100 young of year fish to get length frequency data. They install temperature data loggers during the open water season leading up to this fall sampling program so they can get an idea of temperature changes. And again, we look at trends over time, control versus impact, so upstream versus downstream, but we also have regional baseline sites where we compare our test sites to. So, not that this map works out very well on these big screens, but this is just the study area north of Fort McMurray, where we're doing both sentinel species and fish community monitoring. The purple dots are where we're doing both, as well as Bendhos water and hydrology. And the orange sites are where there's just fish community monitoring and Bendhos and water quality and hydrology. To the south of Fort McMurray, we're doing quite a bit of fish community work as well. So I'm just going to show you a bit of results. I'm kind of going to build the story for the Steep Bank River, looking at all the monitoring components. So if you look at just the fish community right now, I'm looking at a catch per unit effort at the top left-hand side. Since we've only been starting to sample fish communities since 2009, so we certainly by no means have a very long data trend, and that is definitely kept in mind as we do the analysis. But we are starting to see in the past couple of years a decrease in the catch per unit of effort of fish. But we're seeing an increase in the past couple of years of species richness. On the lower right-hand side is a tolerance index that we calculate, and that's taking into account the proportion of sensitive species in the community. Sensitive species means that they would be most influenced by contaminants or changes to the habitat. So in the Fort McMurray area, these would be things like slimy sculpin, long-nosed dace, grayling would be another one. So actually, the lower the tolerance index, the greater proportion of sensitive species in the community. So this is actually showing that although catch per unit effort is decreasing, we're still getting some sensitive species in the community. The shading in the graphs show the expected normal range from all of our baseline data that we've collected over time. So similar to Bruce's presentation, we've started to develop this regional baseline model using our fish and fish habitat data. So looking at the sentinel species, for this we look more at reproduction endpoints, energy use endpoints, and the general condition of the fish. So you can see, I'll just highlight a couple of things. In the years where we saw a few changes in the fish community, a decrease in relative abundance, in 2012. We also saw a bit of change in the female GSI, which is the relative body weight or relative gonad weight. We also saw some changes in the relative liver weight of males in those years as well. So this is just showing that we have seen years where we're seeing some changes in fish communities. We're also seeing a few changes in the sentinel species as well. So just to summarize, for the fish community, we've seen a decrease in CPUE over time, but an increasing proportion of sensitive species in the community. And the sensitive species component has been a bit difficult to interpret the results. There's been variables describing that energetics and reproduction have been inconsistent between males and females. So it's been difficult to come up with a clear pattern in response in fish. We also, this is a data that Mark has collected over time and it's on the JOSM portal, but I didn't have the age data to complete the entire analyses. So taking into account that we have seen some changes in the fish at the fish level, we can go back and now look at what possible stressors there could be. So the top part of this graph shows the river discharge over these 5 years. And you can see that we've had, and the little asterisks are showing when we actually went out and sampled. In 2012, you saw there was incredibly high flow events. 2012, we had a lot of large rain events in the region, extreme amounts of flooding right in the beginning of September and right before we went out to sample. Our capture efficiency was lower. It was really fast-moving water, so our catch per unit effort decreased. Bruce also saw a decrease in abundance during that year as well. Whereas years of 2011 and 2013 were quite low flow years, and we caught a lot more fish. It was better fishing years. So we could see some patterns related to river discharge. This also could be showing that in years where there's really high flows in 2010 and 2012, there could be a flushing of the system. Fish were moved into deeper waters or were hiding, or they were flushed out of those tributaries back into the main stem. Looking at water quality, we see years where there's high flows in 2012 and 2010. We're seeing high TSS. We see high metal concentrations that are particulate related. We also, in low flow years in 2011 and 2013, we see higher concentrations of ions, so saltier conditions. So we do see changes in water quality and hydrology in years that we're also seeing changes in fish communities. I'll just mention that we also assess land change, as Steve Gunther mentioned this morning. The lower side of the Steep Bank River is quite wide open. There's a bit of land change down there, as well as the Steep Bank River has quite steep banks, and so the TSS, or the runoff from rain events, could be a lot more prominent at that part of the river. The upper Steep Bank River is no longer steep bank. It's just more of a muskeg area, but just a flatter terrain. So you're not seeing the effects of large rain events up there as much as you would at the downstream end. And the land clearing, though, has remained consistent since 2009. So there's been no increasing development in that area of the river for the past 5 or 6 years, I guess. And then just coming back, Bruce already showed these graphs, but what we saw in the Bendhos in these years is a similar pattern to what we saw in the fish community. We had low abundance in the years where there was high flow and large rain events, but we also saw an increase in the percent sensitive taxa in 2013. So we're seeing fairly consistent patterns. So what this harmonizing of the program has fostered a greater understanding of the biological responses. We're sort of beginning now to connect the dots between the monitoring components and tying things together to provide a more comprehensive approach to monitoring. We have valued the long-term data set and the continuity of using the same methods over time. Right now we're trying to increase the signal-to-noise ratio in our regional baseline variability. So we're trying to collect enough data that we can reduce the noise and be able to pick up changes if they are there. The other things that we need to consider, though, is other factors. These are really variable systems, particularly related to fish. There's a lot of temporary barriers in terms of beaver dams and other factors that definitely affect the fish abundance on a seasonal basis and interannually, and those things need to be considered, and they are tough to quantify on an annual basis. And then the other thing is to consider is, this is a non-lethal program. You can do it almost everywhere, which is valuable. The lethal Sentinel Species program is not only costly, but it might eventually have an effect on the fish populations, and that's something we're trying to avoid. So there's ongoing evaluations to determine whether the non-lethal community work can supplement the Sentinel species monitoring and still be able to detect changes from oil sands development. And that's it. Thank you.
Any questions then for Heather? Move along. Anybody? Fish? Yep, we got a fish.
Not a fish, but Carolyn Campbell from Alberta Wilderness Association. I understood from the draft surface water quantity framework of the Alberta government that to assist long-term evaluation of whether water withdrawal rules were robust enough, there would be index of native fish integrity as well as fish community index. Actually, I might have that last phrase a little bit wrong, but would your work directly feed into that, or are there still missing pieces in order to do that, or do you know?
I know a little bit. We developed the fish community sampling protocols under RAMP in 2009 when the province had yet to come out with their fish community sampling protocols. Since that time that they have, and they've started to work on this index of native integrity, I think was what it was called. We've done a review or a comparison of what the data we currently collect versus what they collect, and or what they would like or need. And we do have the data that could support that work. I know that ESRD has used some of RAMP work to calculate that index. So moving forward, the data that we've collected in the past 5 or 6 years, I think can be used to continue trends, but I'm not actually sure what direction it's moving in right now.
Art Hansen, who will be speaking tomorrow, so I'm getting a few little extra things in right now. But what I'm wondering, I would have thought, given that you were talking about sort of the health of the populations and that, there's nothing on fish growth rates, scale samples or other things like that, or nothing on the actual physical condition of the fish in different years. And wondering if anybody is actively doing that right now to complement the work that you're doing, or are you people planning to do some of that?
So the difficulty in a 15-minute presentation is that we do a lot of fish sampling in the region, and I don't have enough time to talk about it all. So we do, for the Sentinel species work, we look at growth in terms of size of age. We take aging structures. The data that we have from the past 5 years, I was trying to combine some stuff that Environment Canada was doing as well as Hatfield, and I don't have everything to provide in this presentation. On the main stem, where we've been doing fish inventories now since 1997, and there's a bit of historical data leading up to there, we do have size at age data and age frequency data to look at growth of quite a few of the large-bodied species in the region to get an idea. We also, on the main stem, look at fish abnormalities and do an assessment of external abnormalities in fish to document over time. We do that on the tributaries as well, but the fish we catch are quite small, so you don't see abnormalities as often. But yes, all of that data is recorded, and we have it available.
You just asked if there was a trend in data.
Yeah, no consistent trend over time. It's really variable when you see changes in fish health. And it's also, seasonality is quite a big factor when it comes to the condition of fish. When a lot of the fish are migrating up the river in the spring, they're in a lot poorer condition because they're physiologically stressed versus in the fall. So we haven't seen any specific trends in condition of fish over time. A lot of variability, particularly in the main stem. the percentage of fish that maybe have a sort of a type of abnormality in terms of fin erosion or body wound or something like that ranges between, you know, less than 1% to 2 to 3% over time. So it's quite variable, and I haven't seen anything increasing or decreasing.